Okay, here we go with another Gemlin paper. This one is experiencing, a variable in the process of therapeutic change. For many years, there has been a heated discussion in psychology between those who emphasize the need for operational scientific method and those who emphasize the need for consideration of the subjective, personally important variables of human phenomenon which science too often omits. The present paper holds that both viewpoints express the need for science to move from naturalistic and subjective observation of important human phenomena to operationally defined observations of these phenomena. Okay, so two camps. Wanting to apply a scientific method to psychology versus those who want to get more into the subjective experience of human phenomena, which science too often admits. So, this putting it really simply, but the kind of stuff that goes in poetry that can't really be measured, but is deeply true in a subjective way for the person who's writing it and expressing it. Those kinds of things often get ignored by science, just because there's no easy way to research them or measure them. The present paper holds that both viewpoints express the need. So, the need for science to move from So they both express the need for science to move from, these are the two camps, naturalistic and subjective observation. So these two different ways of observing human phenomena and having better ways to, to operationally defined observation. I don't know. I'll keep going. The purpose of theory is to lead to hypotheses and operationally defined observations which test hypotheses. It is the contention of this paper that theory, which conceptualizes subjective observations, can lead to operational hypotheses and research. Operationally defined observation is the aim, not the start of theory. The theory of experiencing, here presented, starts with subjective and naturalistic observation. It attempts to formulate theoretical concepts which lead to operational research categories. Operational and objective standards of science should be applied to the research procedures that result from theory, not to the naturalistic observations from which theory must start. If the start and the outcome of theory are confused, observations of central variables of human behavior will be kept out of science on the grounds that such observations are subjective. That's an important sentence. The present paper formulates 6 theoretical propositions which refer to a subjective process, experiencing. The paper will attempt to show that a theory which formulates concepts referring to a subjective process can lead to objective operational research. Okay, so I guess the thing that I'm just stuck on is what exactly it means to have an operationally defined observation. I mean, there's things being said in here which sound a lot like things he said in other papers, so I could make sense of it just on that, but I want to stick to what he's saying here. So it is the contention of this paper that theory which conceptualizes subjective observations, which is what you do in focusing, right, is you're giving a handle or a concept or word to the raw subjective experience, right, symbolizing it for yourself. Doing that, or a theory which does that, can lead to operational hypotheses and research. I suppose I don't actually know how Genlin would define theory. Especially like theory as opposed to, or in contrast to, concepts. Like when he says theory which conceptualizes subjective observations, I don't know what he's referring to exactly. Like I imagine that it's everything that he's been writing about, this idea of experiencing. But I don't know if experiencing is a theory in his way of talking about it. So I don't know. Or like a process model. Is that a theory for him? Or is that something else? I don't know. Operationally defined observation is the aim, not the start of theory. Because, I mean, he's said elsewhere many times that theory allows you to see things that you didn't see before. That's like the main use of it. It gives you a way to look for things that you didn't know to look for. And then once you see those things, you don't necessarily need to hold on to the theory. But the things that you see may not be fully explainable by the theory. There might be things that you see due to the theoretical framework that you're looking from, that nonetheless don't fit perfectly within the theory. Like there are, this example I'm thinking of, I'm pretty sure is from one of these papers, or at least from Genlin somewhere, where he talks about Newton doing experiments like about gravity and motion, and like doing these experiments, which I remember doing in college too, where you he filled up a bucket with water and hung the bucket by a rope and turned the bucket until the rope was all wound up, right? Like if you're in a swing and you spin it around a bunch of times and then let go and the bucket spins as the rope unwinds, and the way that the water moves in the bucket, to some degree matched his theory about gravity and motion, but there are other bits that he kind of just ignored. I think specifically it was the way in which the water climbed up the side of the bucket as the bucket was spinning. But anyway, so the theory allows you to even come up with a hypothesis, right? Or like an experiment of that sort to test certain ideas. But then in the testing, when you actually then go observe what happens within the experiment, there is more than just what the theory leads you to expect. And why am I saying all that? Does that even connect to this? That operationally defined observation is the aim. I guess what I'm getting from that is the start of theory is those parts that don't fit into your existing theory. I mean, I guess that almost seems like so obvious once I say it that way. Like, if you have a theory and you have observations that fit that theory, well, then they fit that theory. To have the start of another theory, you have to have observations that don't fit the original theory. Then you're like, okay, well, that's clearly happening, and I don't know how to explain it. So what is going on there? That's the start of a new theory. From there, you can make experiments and hypotheses and whatnot, and build out a further theory, and then go through that process again, where you've discovered something that you don't know how to explain. You research it through experiment and hypothesis. You come up with a better explanation that encompasses more than what the previous theory did, and yet you then discover new things that don't fit into the theory, and then you do it again. But yeah, so here, and this answers my question before. The theory of experiencing. Yeah. So the theory of experiencing here presented starts with subjective and naturalistic observation, right? So not confining observation simply to things that can be measured, right? That's what's going on in experiencing. You're attending to, you're paying attention to things which are wholly subjective, are happening within your own body, right? They're like the most vague, subtle feelings. The whole freaking process is trying to figure out a way to describe it. It doesn't first present itself to you in a way that you know how to describe. So even further, you don't know how to measure it. But it's nonetheless there. You're perceiving it. So starting from that. And then working from those into having concepts, building out a theory, etc. I feel like I'm not really getting anywhere by talking about this paragraph anymore. Let's see how much. I probably will go no further than the end of 3, but probably a lot less. Okay. So part 1, the experience process. Therapeutic change may be viewed as an outcome or as a process. Outcome is the difference between personality measures before and after psychotherapy. A good deal of theory and research has been devoted to the outcome of psychotherapy. By process, on the other hand, I mean an ongoing flow of events that occurs continuously in the individual. Outcome differences are the result of an ongoing process of therapy. Very little theory and research has so far dealt with this process. And again, he then goes on to write a book called A Process Model, which has his philosophical work, where he thinks about building up an understanding of what it means to be alive and to change and grow and live through this idea of our living process being an ongoing flow of events that occurs continuously within us. Anyway, so there's a lot of research. Again, at this point, this paper's from the 60s, so there's been 60 years since then, but nonetheless, at that time anyway, there's been a lot of research about the outcomes of therapy, measuring the before and measuring the after, but not a lot of research and theory on how the actual process of change occurs. In this paper, I will discuss one variable of the process of therapy. I will call that variable experiencing. Let me begin my delineation of the variable experiencing by discussing two of its characteristics. One, experiencing is felt rather than thought, known, or verbalized. And two, experiencing occurs in the immediate present. It is not generalized attributes of a person such as traits, complexes, or dispositions. Rather, experiencing is what a person feels here and now in this moment. Experiencing is a changing flow of feeling which makes it possible for every individual to feel something in any given moment. I would like to discuss these two characteristics of experiencing together. So I've obviously read several papers on experiencing already, so I don't know that there's anything new here, but so it's felt rather than thought, known, or verbalized, right? So these being things that happen intellectually, mentally, verbalized as in it's not what comes out of our mouth, but it's like in our body, right? To be felt is to be, it's in us, in our body specifically. And it happens right now, in the immediate present, moment by moment by moment by moment. It is not generalized. Right? He hasn't used it here, but he talks about his position on human beings not being made up of content, right? Which would be a way to describe these things, like that we are made up of personality traits, or that we are made up of psychological complexes or dispositions, emotional dispositions. That's like saying we're built of these things, which are like static things about us. He doesn't really believe that. Generalized attributes. They're like abstracted, conceptualized. They're the opposite. I mean, in many ways, they're the opposite to what you are paying attention to when you are focusing or experiencing. Because those things, the feeling, the murky edge, as he calls it, it's something that we struggle to put words to, and it's also changing moment by moment. These things don't change moment by moment, and we have words for them. But if we were to say, like, the whole idea is like, this is a fixed abstract thing to talk about, like a personality trait. But then if you say, well, what is the actual experience of being that personality trait, and you actually think and feel closely about what that actually means, you're going to discover all sorts of things that don't necessarily fit into that idea very well. That's weird. There's just nothing here for one. Anyway, well, 1, experiencing is a process of feeling. 2, experiencing occurs in the immediate present. When therapists discuss cases, they use rough metaphoric terms to refer to a feeling process. They often say that they observe clients emotionally absorbing something, or working through, or feeling through. The therapeutic process is observed to involve not only concepts, but also a feeling process, which I would like to call experiencing. Yeah, that's interesting, these metaphoric things. Absorbing, right? Which is like a physical process, like a sponge absorbing the water. If you put a towel in a puddle, absorbs the water. Or working through something. I mean, that's not that specific, but like, it's a way of talking about like a physical interaction with something, right? Like untangling a knot, or like cutting a tree down, or shoveling a pile of compost, working through something, or feeling through, right? Like almost like if you're in like a jungle at night and you're like walking through there and you can't see anything, but you're feeling your way through, right? You're physically engaging with the place that you're in. Freud relates how he discovered that it was not sufficient for therapy to arrive at an accurate diagnosis. The diagnosis had to be communicated to the patient. Then, the patient still had to be brought to understand and accept it. But even then, the patient often accepted the diagnosis more as a matter of courtesy for the doctor, or as a matter of intellectual insight, without genuine emotional change. I guess this is a quote from Freud. The ego still finds it difficult to nullify its repressions, even after it has resolved to give up its resistances. And we have designated the phase of strenuous effort which follows upon this laudable resolution as the period of working through. But this is, okay, so arrive at a diagnosis, right? So the therapist arrives at a diagnosis, right? And then tells the patient what the diagnosis is, right? So it's like the therapist has some conceptual, like theoretical understanding of what's going on with the patient that the patient doesn't. The therapist then delivers that idea to the patient and being like, this is what's the problem with you. Then the patient still has to understand and accept it, right? So there's like the understanding, which is intellectual. It's like, that makes sense, versus, and then also being like, that makes sense, and I like am okay with that. Like I'm willing to not only understand it, but like allow that to be the case about myself and not fight it, not deny it. I mean, deny is just the obvious opposite of that. But, right, like someone could tell you that like you have fucking issues with your parents or whatever. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense, but still fight back against it, right? And have it as an intellectual idea that you then do nothing with. But yeah, this idea of accepting it, like, is it really being accepted in such a way that it like is fully taken in by the person, or is it accepted as a matter of courtesy or just intellectually? Because if it is those two things, Genlin talks about, that doesn't lead to any change. It's like someone giving you advice and you're like, oh, thank you for the advice, but like the advice doesn't actually, like, you know that you're not going to do it, even though it makes sense, right? You're just like, oh yeah, thanks for the advice, but like I'm not going to do that actually. Same thing with a diagnosis. Genuine psychotherapy began at this point, that is to say, at the point of going beyond the intellectual approach by helping the patient to an immediate present experiencing of his problems. Even though the problems may concern events which occurred early in life, therapeutic change in these problems requires a present experiencing, that is to say, a present feeling process. Freud achieved this present immediacy by discovering manifestations of the patient's problems in the present moment of the relationship between doctor and patient. In this way, the patient could be helped to grapple with his problems on an emotional level and in the immediate present. Right, so going beyond the intellectual approach by helping a patient to an immediate present experiencing of his problem, which was like what I was trying to say before about these things, the traits, complexes. It's like, yeah, you can have like this intellectual idea that like I'm an angry person, or I have like a inferiority complex or whatever. But then you're like, okay, well, what's that actually like? What's the actual experience of having that trait, for example, right? Like, let's forget about the idea of it and be like, what's the actual experience of it? What thoughts make that up? What feelings make that up? What feelings in your body, moment by moment by moment? So you say you're an angry person. How does that feel right now? In what way are you experiencing being an angry person? What is the subjective experience of being an angry person? When you do that, that's when change begins to happen. From this discussion by Freud, we may formulate the two characteristics of experiencing stated above. 1, experiencing is a process of feeling rather than intellectual understanding. And 2, experiencing is a process which occurs in the immediate present of the therapy hour. Okay, I'm going to stop there.